You haven't missed the gardening boat. You can sow seeds right now for fall and winter harvest.
There's a lot of excitement about gardening right now. There's a lot of concern about supply chains with food, and by gardening, you can really take control of your own supply chain.
A lot of people think that the only time to start a garden is in March, April, May, and the springtime, but in fact, you can start a garden in July. You have not missed the boat.
I'm Natalie.
And I'm Chloe.
And we are with Wild Abundance and the Online Gardening School.
This program helps guide you through all the steps to create your own abundant garden. Here's a little sneak peek of the kinds of things we teach in the Online Gardening School.
We hope you enjoy it.
So gardening in the fall is not just about catching up because you missed out on spring gardening. It's its own thing, and it has a lot of wonderful benefits. And in some ways, for some crops, can actually be better than gardening in the spring and summer. So I'm just going to talk about a few of the benefits of fall gardening, and then Natalie's going to talk about a few of them too. So one of them that's really, really helpful is that the soil is really warm. And warm soil will germinate seeds a lot more easily than cool soil in the case of most seeds. And so rather than, seeds taking a really long time to germinate and potentially rotting or just having more time to get, fungal diseases and things like that, they get a fast start. And that's really helpful because then they've done a lot of growing by the time cool weather sets in and they grow a little slower. They've had that initial burst. Another great advantage of gardening in the fall is that a lot of crops that do well in the fall actually get sweeter when the weather gets cold. So they're in their bodies of those plants, they convert starches into sugars. And the taste of, for example, a fall-grown carrot or a fall-grown broccoli or kale is way more tasty than those same crops if you plant them in the spring and harvest them in the summer, because when they ripen it's warm, and instead of making those sweet compounds they actually make spicier bitter compounds, which is their attempt to combat all of the pests that come in with the warm weather. So another advantage of fall gardening has to do with pests, and pests tend to proliferate in warm weather and then die back and do the part of their life cycle that's underneath the soil and not actively eating plants when it gets cool. So if you can get your fall-grown plants through the end of the worm season into the cool time, especially after the frost, then you're not going to be dealing with bugs, basically, those kinds of pests that want to eat your crops. And you're going to have a lot easier time growing many things like kale and collards and cabbage and other things too. Another great thing is that when your summer garden is waning and when most people's whole garden journey is at its end, you will have this abundance of delicious food to eat. So it's kind of like keeps the cycle of abundance and keeps the harvest window open much longer when you garden in the fall.
Another awesome advantage of growing stuff in the fall is that when you harvest something that's a spring crop, there's something to put it in its place. So like with onions and garlic, you pull those out in June or July typically, and you can have something to put there, which is really nice. You might want to plant some buckwheat or something to get you in between, depending on where you are, in between the time when you're planting, when you're harvesting and when you're planting, or you might just pull one crop and plant another crop. Another thing is that I really like being in the garden, and so by planting fall crops, I'm able to be in the garden like more of the year, which is really nice for me, and just to be able to harvest kale and all these wonderful things in the wintertime when they're so much tastier when they're harvested fresh, and that way I can avoid going to the store as often, which is really nice for me. Springtime tends to be extremely hectic for me and for many gardeners that I know. And July tends to be a little more easygoing. And so that's another thing that I like about fall gardening is that I can put stuff into the ground when things are not so crazy, which is really helpful. And then depending on where you are, with minimal covering, you can have an abundance of fresh food in the winter. And you can be eating from your land all year long or close to all year long. And how much you're going to have to cover really depends on where you live. Like if you're in Florida or in South Georgia, you might not be covering at all or covering really minimally. Whereas if you are in Maine, you are going to have like really bulletproof coverings.